Hey everyone, how are you doing today? I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. Today I'm very excited to talk about this little cutie right here. As you can see from the title of the video, I have the Urban Decay 3 Mini palette. This is my very first Urban Decay palette ever, therefore my first naked palette ever. I know that the Naked 3 is very popular, and honestly, every time I go into Ulta, I look at it. There's something about the color story I'm really drawn to, but I'd never purchased it for one reason or another, so I decided to get the Mini, and once I got it, I decided I needed to try and dupe it out with my stash, and I figured I would show you guys the results. I have not tried the palette versus the dupe on my eyes yet, so I'm really excited to do that with you guys today. I'm drinking matcha again today. I still haven't gotten off the matcha train. I'm not upset about it. I'm firmly seated and buckled in. Oh, yeah, so good. So before we try them on one eye versus the other, I'll quick show you my dupe. When I say dupe, only a couple of the shades I would say are actual dupes. The other ones I'm kind of just duping the vibes. They're similar to each other, not exactly the same. If I had a larger stash, I'm pretty sure I would have been able to dupe out the shades because they're not that unique. I just couldn't find one that perfectly matched a few of them. So let's start off with the very first shade over here. This is the shade Glassy, and it looks just kind of white in the pan, kind of ivory, but it actually has a little bit of a pink undertone to it. So there's the shade Glassy. You can see the pink and the undertone there, or maybe even kind of peachy, mostly pinky. The shade I'm going to dupe it out with is this one from Makeup Geek. This is the shade Shimma Shimma, and the reason why it's not an exact dupe is because it has a bit more, I feel, of a more peachy undertone versus pink. But we'll see how they look on the eyes versus each other. So you can see, not exactly the same, but you know, kind of the same vibe. Have I done my nails yet? No, I haven't. I just realized I meant to do that before this video. Oh well, real life. So the second shade is the shade called Public. This is a light peachy pink, more on the peachy side. Okay, so here we have the Urban Decay shade. To dupe it out, I'm gonna use the shade In the Spotlight from Makeup Geek. This one I feel is even more peachy than the Makeup Geek one. I'm sorry, than the Urban Decay one. You can see, definitely not dupes. But I feel like, especially on the eye, they will probably give similar results. And I feel like on my arm, they look more similar than they do on camera. On camera, In the Spotlight is especially peachy. Next up is the shade called Laced Up. This, I don't know, muted, mauve-y, purpley, pinky, beigey tone. It's one of those shades that I really, really love. And whenever a palette has this sort of tone in it, my eye is instantly drawn to it. In fact, I have several palettes that have this sort of shade in it because that's what drew me in. So I felt like it would be easy to find a dupe for it, but actually a lot of the shades in those palettes were too purpley in comparison to this one. Okay, here's the Urban Decay shade called Laced Up. The shade I'm duping it out with is actually from a Morphe palette. This is from the Morphe Jaclyn Hill, I think it's called the Bling Boss palette. I depotted this shadow from the palette and ended up decluttering the rest because their quality was starting to degrade. But this shadow is still fine. In fact, I feel like it was the best shadow in the palette. So here's the one from the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette. I feel like those two are pretty close. Not exactly the same, but pretty close. That shade from the Morphe palette, I think it was called Hush Hush. Next we have another shimmer. This is the shade Stolen. It honestly, swatches, I feel like kind of similar to Public. It's just not as light or as peachy as Public, but definitely same color family. Okay, so there's this shade Stolen. And this is the shade, I'm gonna have to put it up on the screen because it's in Polish, but it's from Glam Shop. This was another one where I could not find an exact dupe for it in my stash. But I feel like especially when they're blended out a little bit, they look more similar. You can see the differences. I feel like similar enough probably, especially on the eye. This next one surprised me a little bit. So the shade Right Time here, it looks a lot deeper in the pan than it actually swatches for me. This is another shade that whenever I see it in a palette, I go, ooh, I like that shade. Okay, so here's the shade Right Time. And I'm gonna use the shade Speedway from Sydney Grace. This is one of my favorite shadows ever. I love this shadow so much. And in the pan, it looks like it wouldn't be as dark as that Urban Decay shade, but I feel like they're pretty close. Okay, so that is one swatch of it, but if we layer it up just a little bit, it deepens up a little bit. So you can see, not exactly the same, but similar, yeah. Lastly, in the palette is the shade Spiced. This shadow surprised me. I thought it was a matte. It's not. It's more like a satin. And it looks like it's pretty dark, but it's not a very pigmented shade. Here's the shade Spiced. And for that shade, I did not have a single that I could use, but I did find in one of my palettes a dupe. So this is from the e.l.f. New Classics palette. The shade right here called Black Cherry. There we go. Again, not exactly the same, but pretty similar. So there we have the palette and the shades I'm going to use to dupe it out on my eyes. What do you think, guys? Yes, there's differences, but I think there's enough similarities to where I could call it at least duping the vibes, huh? Okay, so this eye, I'm going to use the Urban Decay palette on. This side, my dupe shades. I'm not gonna do a very complicated look. I think I'm gonna stick very much with what I would normally do with a palette like this. So I'm gonna start with the shade Laced Up. Honestly, on a larger, fluffier brush than I would normally use. I usually use pretty small brushes, but since I'm planning on putting this all over my eye and up into the crease, I use a nice big fluffy brush. And I already have eyeshadow primer on both sides. As you can see, it is a very light shade, but definitely everyday appropriate. All right, on this side, I'm going to use the shade from the Morphe palette, the shade called Hush Hush. What do you think so far? Just looking at it, no, I don't think I would be able to tell the difference. Next, I'm going to go into the shade Right Time, just to add some definition. I'm gonna use a more, the shape of brush. This is a Sigma E25. And I'm just gonna lightly put that into the crease for a little more definition. And I kind of put it on the outer corner too, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna grab the blending brush I used on that eye just to blend that together. So then that means I'm gonna go into Sydney Gray's Speedway and do the same on this eye. Okie dokie, let's try out some of these shimmers. I'm gonna use the shade Stolen, and I'm gonna try using it with my finger because that's usually how I apply shimmer shadows. And I'm gonna keep it, oh no, I put it on the wrong side. Good thing, okay, I barely started. We'll go back over here to the Urban Decay side. And we will kind of put it on the outer half. So then I'm gonna go into the Glam Shop shade and put it on the outer half of this side. I think that's where I see a little bit more of a difference. This one being a little bit more pinky purpley and that one being a bit more peachy. But I don't know if someone would notice a difference just looking at me. I'm gonna try to use up as many of these shades as possible. So now let's go in the Urban Decay palette into the shade Public. I did wipe off my fingers, by the way, and I'm gonna put that on the more inner part of my eyelid. Urban Decay this side, okay. Now I'll use the shade In the Spotlight on this side. Now, slight color difference aside, I do know that In the Spotlight is a very shiny shade, so we'll see how much more bright this eye ends up being. I'm gonna try to go a little light-handed. Yeah, I'm starting to see a difference. In the Spotlight, I feel like is brighter and more foiled metallic, whereas the Urban Decay shadows are a little bit not quite as foiled. For the shade Spiced, I'm just going to take a little eyeliner brush and press it into the upper and lower lash line a bit. Okay, and then I'm just gonna wipe it off in this, it's not a true color switch, it's like it's a dupe brand, but it does the same thing. It cleans the shadow off your brush. And I'm gonna go into the shade Black Cherry from the e.l.f. New Classics. Okay, lastly, I'm going to take the shade Glassy and put it on the inner corner. And a little bit on under the eye as well. Then I will wipe it off and use Makeup Geek Shimma Shimma on this side. Okay, this side again is more vibrant than this side. I'm gonna try and add some more of the Urban Decay on this side to make it match. It's a little bit better. Okay, I'm gonna put some mascara on and then we can compare the sides and see what we think. All right, here's the finished look. I honestly, looking closely, can see differences, but I don't know if someone just looking at me would, you know, immediately notice that my eyeshadow was from completely different eyeshadows on my eyes. Let me know if you would notice if you were just talking to me. One of the biggest differences I see is that my indie shadows on this side, they do have a bit more pow to them, where these are a little bit more subdued, not quite as foiled and metallic, even though I tried to go light-handed on this side and not make them nuts. Again, here was my duping or not duping palette, you know, depending, or duping the vibes, I guess you could say. But I had a lot of fun going through my collection and seeing if I could dupe out my new palette, and considering how close these eye looks look, I just have to smile. I mean, I really wanted to try a Naked 3 palette, and this just proves to me how often, you know, when we're drawn to a certain color story, we buy the same palette over and over again, even in terms of singles. But I'm happy I have this little thing. This will be fun to travel with. Sometimes my more indie shadows can be a little bit more delicate. Not necessarily the shadows I was showing you, but sometimes they can. So sometimes I hesitate to travel with them, whereas this guy, it's pretty sturdy. I think it would be fine traveling with it. And despite the fact that I have similar shades already in my collection, I do like the color story. I know a lot of people gave it quite a bit of flack for being boring, but it's exactly the type of thing I like. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I had a lot of fun duping out that palette. I really appreciate you guys being here with me and watching all the way to the end of the video. Thank you so much. Let me know if you are even attracted to this palette, if you decided to purchase it, or it was like an instant pass for you. And I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye!